All right, welcome back to the deep dive. So glad you can join us again. Today, we're going to dig into something I know a lot of you are super interested in, figuring out how to learn new stuff quickly, but also making sure it really sticks.
Yeah, and the cool thing is we're not just going to throw tips at you. We're actually going to go deep into some pretty powerful learning frameworks based on an article that landed in my inbox recently that I thought would be perfect for this.
Yeah, this article was awesome. Really gets into the nitty-gritty of how our brains actually work when we learn. And this is the really interesting part. It highlights the difference between two types of learners, self-driven and self-directed.
You know, those terms get thrown around a lot, but what I loved about this article is it connects them to these really concrete ideas like brain page theory, system monography, even something called the happiness classroom model. I mean, it's like a roadmap for how to learn better, faster, and actually enjoy the process, which I think is what we all want.
Exactly. And our mission in this deep dive is to break all that down for you in a way that actually makes sense, right? We want you to walk away with a clear understanding of how these two types of learners operate, and more importantly, how you can use those insights to become a more effective learner, no matter what you're trying to learn. So, are you ready to dive in?
Absolutely. Let's do it.
Okay, cool. So, first things first, let's define our terms here. When the article talks about self-driven learners, what exactly are we talking about? What makes them tick?
All right, so picture this. Think about a time you got absolutely hooked on a subject, like just totally fascinated by it. Maybe it was a new hobby, a particular historical period, anything. You just had this burning desire to learn more. That's the essence of a self-driven learner.
Right, so it's not about someone cracking a whip and forcing you to study. It's like that internal spark, that genuine curiosity.
Mm.
But the article also brings up the substantia nigra, the part of the brain, and how it's activated in self-driven learners.
Hmm.
Could you unpack that a little bit? And how does this whole motor knowledge transfer thing fit into the picture?
Yeah. I know those terms sound a bit jargony, but stick with me. So the substantia nigra, think of it like the reward center in your brain. When you're truly engaged in something, like really into it, that part of your brain lights up, and it basically signals that what you're doing is important and worth paying attention to.
Okay, so it's like your brain is saying, hey, this is interesting, let's focus on this.
Exactly. And that's where motor knowledge transfer comes in. The basic idea here is that when you're actively involved in the learning process, your brain is more likely to retain that information. And by actively involved, I don't just mean physically doing something, although that can definitely help. It can also be things like mentally visualizing concepts, taking notes, even just talking about what you're learning with someone else. All of those actions help to solidify those neural connections in your brain.
So it's not just about passively absorbing information. You have to actively engage with it to really make it stick.
Mm-hmm.
And speaking of making things stick, the article talks about cyclicide rehearsal, or TCR. Can you break that down for us and how it relates to self-driven learning?
Yeah, cyclicide rehearsal is a fancy way of saying practice makes perfect, but it's actually a bit more nuanced than that. The idea is that your brain organizes information into these things called Brainpage modules. Think of them like mental files that hold specific pieces of knowledge.
Okay, like a little filing cabinet in your head.
Exactly. And when you engage in cyclicide rehearsal, you're essentially revisiting those Brainpage modules over and over again, strengthening the connections between them, and making that knowledge more accessible and durable. And for self-driven learners, this happens naturally because they're constantly going back to those topics they're passionate about, exploring them from different angles, thinking about them deeply. So they're constantly reinforcing those neural pathways.
That makes a lot of sense. And I love how the article connects this to the miniature school concept, where learners basically become like small teachers and really take ownership of the learning process. It's almost like they create their own internal classroom where they're both the student and the teacher.
Yeah, the miniature school is a really cool way to visualize this. It's about taking that information from, say, a book or a lecture and actively transferring it into your own understanding, building those brain page modules in your mind. And the small teacher idea highlights the importance of teaching yourself and others, even if it's just explaining a concept out loud. That act of teaching reinforces the knowledge in a powerful way.
Okay, so that's the self-driven learner. Now let's shift gears and talk about the self-directed learner. How are they different? What are their defining characteristics?
While both are super effective, self-directed learners are a bit more, I guess you could say, strategic in their approach. They're all about taking the reins of their education, setting very clear goals, planning out their learning journey, and constantly monitoring their progress. They're like the project managers of their own learning.
Okay, so more structured, more deliberate. And the article where mentions this SOTM framework as a tool they use to achieve that. Yeah. Can you explain what SOTM stands for and how it helps them organize their learning?
Right, so SOTM stands for space, object, time, instance, and module. And basically, it's a way to break down learning into these key elements. So space is about thinking about where and how you're learning best. Object is the specific knowledge or skill you're trying to acquire. Time is about scheduling your learning and breaking it into manageable chunks. Instance is about finding real-world examples and applications. And finally, module is about seeing how all these pieces fit together into a larger framework of understanding.
Wow, it's like having a blueprint for your learning journey. I can see how that would be incredibly helpful for someone who wants to be really thorough and systematic. And one thing the article points out is that self-directed learners are very proactive about seeking out and correcting their own errors,
Yeah.
right? They're constantly assessing their understanding.
Yeah, absolutely. They're not afraid of making mistakes because they see them as valuable opportunities to learn and refine their knowledge. So instead of just passively absorbing information, they're constantly asking themselves, do I really get this? Where are my gaps in understanding, and what can I do to improve?
So they're like detectives, constantly searching for clues to deepen their understanding. And this whole idea of self-regulating learning, that seems like a crucial skill they develop, right?
It is. It's about becoming your own teacher, being able to identify your learning needs, figure out the best strategies for you, and then track your progress and make adjustments along the way. It's incredibly empowering, and it makes you a much more effective and independent learner.
I love that. So we've got these two distinct learning approaches. Let's do a quick recap here just to make sure it's crystal clear for everyone. What are the core differences between self-driven and self-directed learners?
All right, so to sum it up, both self-driven and self-directed learners are driven to achieve mastery, but their fuel is different. Self-driven learners are all about that passion, that intrinsic motivation. They're the ones who get super excited about a topic and just dive in head first. They're naturally forming those Brainpage modules through their deep engagement and curiosity.
And their strength lies in that deep, almost intuitive understanding they develop. But they might sometimes lack a little structure, right?
Yeah, that can be a challenge for them. They might jump from one shiny object to the next, getting distracted by new and interesting things, which isn't always a bad thing, but it can make it harder to achieve a really comprehensive understanding.
Whereas self-directed learners, they're all about structure, planning, and that deliberate step-by-step approach. They use frameworks like SOTM to organize their learning, set clear goals, and systematically refine their understanding. They're the masters of taking control and creating their own learning journey.
Exactly. And their strength is that consistency, that ability to stay focused and methodically work their way towards mastery. They're also really good at identifying their own weaknesses and finding ways to address them. So they might not be as initially driven by passion as a self-driven learner, but they more than make up for it with their organization and discipline.
Okay, so we've got the self-driven learner fueled by passion and curiosity, and the self-directed learner, the master strategist. But the article makes it clear that it's not about choosing one or the other, right? It's about recognizing the strengths of both approaches and finding ways to integrate them into your own learning style. And a big part of that is understanding the concept of Brainpage theory, which the article really emphasizes. Can you give us a little Brainpage theory 101? What is it and why is it so important?
So Brainpage theory essentially says that learning is most effective when it actively involves what they call motor science and is tailored to the individual. It moves away from that old school model of just sitting passively and absorbing information.
So less lecture, more action.
Exactly. And the central concept in brain page theory is the brain page itself. Think of a brain page as a neural network in your brain that encodes a specific piece of knowledge. It's not just one neuron firing. It's a whole interconnected web of neurons that allows you to recall and use that information effectively.
So the stronger those connections, the better you understand and remember something.
Exactly. And the article highlights several key ways to strengthen those brain page connections. One is through active motor engagement. This basically means getting your body involved in the learning process. It could be writing notes by hand, drawing diagrams, building models, anything that gets you physically interacting with the material.
Okay, so not just thinking about it, but actually doing something with it.
Yeah.
What else?
Another one is substantia nigra activation, which we talked about earlier. That's that reward center in your brain that gets activated when you're genuinely interested and engaged in something. So finding ways to make learning fun and exciting can really help to boost your brain's ability to retain information. And then there's thalamic cycloside, or TCR again, which is all about repeatedly activating those brain page modules to solidify the learning.
So kind of like practicing a skill over and over until it becomes second nature.
Precisely. And finally, there's reciprocal learnography, which highlights the power of learning with and from others. This could involve things like group discussions, peer teaching, even just explaining a concept to someone else. The act of teaching forces you to really solidify your own understanding.
So it's like turning learning into a social activity, which can be really motivating and engaging.
Yeah, exactly. And all of these principles of brain page theory are woven into this really fascinating model that the article talks about called the happiness classroom.
Okay, the happiness classroom. That sounds intriguing. What exactly is a happiness classroom, and how does it differ from, say, a traditional classroom?
The happiness classroom is designed to create a learning environment that's engaging, stimulating, and most importantly, joyful. It's about moving away from passive learning and embracing active, collaborative, and personalized learning experiences.
So less lecturing, more hands-on exploration and collaboration.
Right. Instead of rows of desks facing a teacher at the front, imagine small groups of students huddled together, working on projects, sharing ideas, and teaching each other. It's about creating a space where students feel empowered to take ownership of their learning and where mistakes are seen as valuable learning opportunities. And a key element of the happiness classroom is the idea of miniature schools, which we touched on earlier. These are like little learning hubs within the classroom where students can collaborate on developing those brain cage modules together.
So it's about fostering a sense of community and shared responsibility for learning.
Yeah, exactly. And the focus shifts from teaching to brain page development. It's about providing students with the tools and support they need to actively construct their own understanding, rather than just passively receiving information.
So instead of just memorizing facts, they're actually building a deeper, more meaningful understanding of the material. And the article mentions that error correction is seen as a crucial part of this process, right?
Absolutely. In the happiness classroom, mistakes aren't seen as failures, but as opportunities to learn and grow. Students are encouraged to actively seek out their own errors, understand why they made them, and then correct them. This process helps to strengthen those neural pathways and really solidify the learning.
So it's about creating a culture where it's safe to make mistakes and where learning from those mistakes is celebrated.
Exactly. And finally, the happiness classroom emphasizes space-guided learning, which incorporates that SODM framework we discussed earlier. It's about creating a physical and mental environment that supports and enhances the learning process.
So not just thinking about what you're learning, but also how and where you're learning it. That makes a lot of sense. Okay, so this all sounds fantastic. Let's get practical here. How do these ideas, these learning styles, actually translate into real-world benefits for someone listening to this right now? I mean, how can this help them learn better, faster, and more effectively?
All right, so let's get specific. Imagine you're a recent science graduate entering a fast-paced STEM field. The ability to learn quickly and adapt to new information is crucial, right? Well, those who've developed both self-driven curiosity and a strong self-directed approach are going to be much better equipped to tackle those challenges.
Okay, so they can dive into new research, solve complex problems, and innovate all skills that are really in demand these days.
Right. And what about entrepreneurship? I mean, that's a field where you constantly need to be learning new things, adapting to changing markets, figuring out new technologies. Self-directed learning is absolutely essential in that environment.
Yeah, you have to be able to identify the skills you need, figure out how to acquire them, and then actually put them into practice, all on your own initiative.
Exactly. And it's not just about specific careers. Think about any skill you want to develop, whether it's learning a new language, mastering a musical instrument, or becoming a better cook. Those principles of self-driven curiosity and self-directed learning are going to make a huge difference in how quickly and effectively you progress.
Right, and the more you practice those skills, those brain page modules, the more ingrained they become.
Exactly. And even for those in academia, research, constantly exploring new ideas, these skills are essential.
Yeah, you have to be both curious and driven to explore those uncharted territories. But you also need that self-discipline and structure to really dive deep and make meaningful contributions.
Absolutely.
All right, so to bring it all home for everyone listening, what's the key takeaway here? What do we want people to walk away with?
I think the biggest takeaway is that everyone has the capacity to be both a self-driven and a self-directed learner. It's not about being one or the other. It's about recognizing the strengths of each approach and finding ways to blend them in a way that works for you.
Exactly. So tap into that internal passion, that curiosity, and let it guide your exploration. But also be intentional, create a structure, and use tools like the SOTM framework to organize your learning and track your progress.
And don't be afraid to experiment, to try new things, to figure out what works best for you. The more you understand about how your brain learns, the more effectively you can learn.
So as a final thought, here's a challenge for you. Think about which of these learning styles, that self-driven explorer or that self-directed strategist, resonates most strongly with you right now. And then ask yourself, how can you intentionally integrate elements of both into your own learning journey? How can you use those insights about motor science, cyclizide rehearsal, the SOTM framework, even the happiness classroom to become a more effective, more engaged, and ultimately more fulfilled learner?
And if any of the ideas we discussed today have really piqued your interest, I encourage you to dig deeper. There's so much amazing research out there on Brainpage theory, system learnography, and all of these fascinating learning models. Keep exploring, keep learning, and keep those brain pages firing.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. We'll see you next time.